Welcome. I'm Richard Schaefer, a journalism professor at UNM, and I'm here today with University Communication Representative Carolyn Gonzales from University Communication and Marketing. And we're going to talk a little bit about doing interviews and scheduling interviews and how journalists and strategic communicators might best conduct interviews. So, Carolyn, when setting up an interview, what do you do? Because you do interviews as a strategic communicator, and you and I have worked together as journalists. What's the best way to go about setting up an interview with someone?
Well, back in the day, you would pick up a phone and call somebody, but now, predominantly, we do it via email. But giving the subject great lead time is a good idea, 2 to 3 days at best. We always say the only time you ask for instant interview is in a breaking news situation. So getting in touch with them via email, letting them know who you are, where this news story is going to be, and an idea of what the story is going to be about is a good way to start.
Now, it's really hard for beginning students to do that. A reporter can say, oh, I work for the Albuquerque Journal, or even a reporter for the Daily Lobo can say, I'm doing a story for the Daily Lobo. But it's fairly important, isn't it, to give them, the interviewee, a range of places it might be if you don't really know where it's going to end up?
Certainly, and especially for students who are doing it as a class project, it's not a problem just to say this is going to be for a class project. It may exist on a website in communication and journalism. It may be used by University Communication and Marketing. Just leave their options open.
And it's fairly important to give them a good sense of the line of questioning, is that right?
You don't do the whole line of questioning, it's more there are topics that we want to cover, and these are some of them. I think just like journalists are not really interested in sharing their questions up front, but to let the individual know these are the topics we want to cover, so that if there are things that they need to look for, information they need to dig up and have at their hands, it's a good idea.
Right. I know that when I've been interviewed by journalists as a researcher or as another journalist, it really helps me to know a day or two in advance the line of questioning. A whole bunch of new ideas come forward. So we talked about, and so you have to introduce yourself in the email, really.
Absolutely. They need to know who they're talking to.
Okay. It's probably important that you introduce yourself at the highest level you might be introduced. So a student who might be working for the Daily Lobo would say, I'm a student who works for the Daily Lobo and is a journalism student, right?
Absolutely. And the other thing to keep in mind, in today's news environment, there are bloggers and a lot of citizen journalists, if you will, and so we try to take all of those people and their requests seriously.
What's a reasonable way to schedule the interview? I mean, so you send this email, and what should you expect back?
I think generally we hear back within a couple of days, and generally give them a time frame of when you would like to do the interview. Maybe 3 or 4 days out if you were getting in touch the middle of the week, maybe for the beginning of the next week. Give them a few days to get it scheduled into, you know, their time frame.
Okay, so now sometimes you're going there with a video camera. It's important, right, that if you're scheduling an interview, you let the person know that you're going to either shoot some photos or shoot video, right? That makes a big difference.
Absolutely, and if you need extra time to set that up, you could ask them, would it be possible for me to get in there a half an hour before the interview to check the light, check everything to make sure it's going to be a good environment for a video shoot.
Right, and as somebody who's often had to do what they call one-man band shoots, I like to get in there a good half hour earlier, figure out where I want to set up the interview in the interviewee's environment, and then set everything up, and then at the last minute call the interviewee in so that they don't feel like I'm abusing their time. Right?
Absolutely.
Let's say you're there and either you're doing an interview with an audio tape recorder or a video recorder or whatever. What do you do to start an interview?
The first thing you need to do when you're starting an interview is to put the person at ease. Nobody wants to have a video that shows somebody wide-eyed and looking fearful while they're being interviewed. So Start with something easy, even just tell me a little bit about you, or tell me a little bit about your research, or how long have you been doing this job? Just something so that they get comfortable with you and with your technique, and then take it from there.
So you've got these subjects you want to deal with. Do you usually deal with the most important one right away? Or?
No, I generally try to ease into it. And by that I mean, okay, you are in maybe the law school and you want to find out about predatory lending. What drove your interest in predatory lending? How did you become interested in that? Before you get into the details of what that means, for example.
Okay, so now even when you're setting up an interview, but sometimes before the interview starts, even when you're emailing, do you suggest that they bring in auxiliary materials like photos or documents that they can share with you? Is that a good idea?
Absolutely. I generally ask if they have any materials that will augment the telling of the story to bring them with them. They may use them as a reference point during the interview, or it may be something that we want to capture on video or in a photograph so that we can use it to help illustrate the story.
Right, and if they've got materials on websites or something like that, before you leave, obviously you want the URL for that website and you want to be able to access it and shoot screenshots of it or a screen-o-matic video of a video that might be on a website, right?
Certainly, and with print stories now in particular, we put those links into the story so that the individual reading it will have access to that directly.
Now, you've been at University Communication and Marketing for a long time. And our journalism and our StratCom program at the University of New Mexico is trying to work more closely with University Communication and Marketing. But your job is not, your primary job is not to educate our students. Your primary job is to work with reporters in the media. What does UCAM do for reporters in the media?
We have a very strong media relations bent in our department. We maintain our own newsroom at news.unm.edu, and it's a resource for journalists to go to look at the kinds of stories UNM is producing about research, about the community, about the campus, about policy, all of those kinds of subjects. And also, it's a place where you can find out who we are as a department, so that journalists know, I cover the law school and architecture and planning, for example, who covers engineering, and they know who's a good resource to go to if they're interested in a subject that that individual is privy to and an expert in. We have an expert's guide online, which is a great resource for journalists. And we also have photos and video and other things that can really help journalists.
And you'll share that photos and video. It is it's a public site, so people can use it in their own material. They should credit it, but they could use it.
Certainly. In fact, last week when our videographer Ryan Montano did a video on Lobo Guardian, he did a fabulous video, and KRQE used part of it because he had done such a fine job with it.
Let's say there's a reporter from New York, or even a student who wants to be a reporter in New York someday, and they need to know who to contact, especially in administration or about a policy question at UNM. Do they just contact somebody at UCAM? How does that work?
Generally, when they contact someone at UCAM, it'll go to the main number, and a lot of those particular questions will go to our communications director, which is Diane Anderson. And she knows who in our department would be the best person to assist that individual. Most of the time, people will think, oh, I want to talk to the president about this. But oftentimes, that may not be the best person to talk to. If it's something having to do with policy, there may be, if it were having to do with faculty matters, it might be the provost. Student affairs, it could be someone in enrollment management. If it's about declining numbers, you know, people don't always know who the right person is. Universities are big places with a lot of people with very specific jobs, and we can put the reporter in touch with the right person.
Okay, so now you've put them in touch, they've contacted you, they've gone through UCAM, they've got an interview with somebody about policy or a researcher who's doing maybe high level of research in in a fairly narrow area. And this person gives you some interesting quotes and interesting, if it's video sound bites or audio sound bites. And now explain to me how a journalist sort of unpacks that and what a strategic communicator does that's a little bit different in that respect.
Okay, so a journalist is going to come in, and the story I thought of right away when you were saying that is we have a wonderful man named Carl Agee who's a meteorite specialist. And when they had the big meteorite in Russia, he was called upon to answer a lot of questions from a lot of journalists around the world. At the same time, we wanted to have a story about his expertise on our website. So the journalist obviously is going to come in, get his or her quotes, go back and do the story. But someone in our office would write the story and run it by him, because we want to make sure that we are doing the best job by him and not making any mistakes in reporting his research.
Good. So journalists can verify a quote, or if they've got something that they are a little bit puzzled by, they can call back the source and maybe say, this is what I want. But my experience as a journalist is you don't want that researcher or that policymaker to rewrite your story for you. But as a strategic communication person who does interviews that in some way are acting on behalf of an institution, the rules are a little different.
They are a little different, but we're pretty particular about not wanting them to rewrite our stories either. We would just ask them to review it for accuracy only.
Okay, great. Anything else you want to add that you think is important for beginning journalism or Stratcom students who are going out and doing interviews that they might need to know?
I think that it's important for them to do it regularly, and even if it's not going to be used for something, just to go out and interview people as a way of getting some experience and listen to the responses that you get. Because you might go in with a series of questions you want to ask, but oftentimes your subject will give you information in a response that leads to something a little more interesting. So always keep your ears open for that. And one of the things I learned in working with you was if you're doing video, take down the time signature. When you hear a really good quote, that will aid you in editing later.
Great. Well, University Communication Representative Carolyn Gonzales, thanks so much.
Thank you.